I've always believed that life moves in predictable rhythms, like the tides pulling in and out along the shore of our quiet coastal town. My name is Daniel Carter, a 42-year-old architect with a modest firm I built from scratch. My wife, Emily, is 38, a radiant woman with hazel eyes that seem to catch every flicker of light. We've been married for 12 years, and though the early passion dulled into routine, I thought we'd settled into something solid, something dependable. Our home, a two-story craftsman with wide windows overlooking the Atlantic, was our sanctuary. Emily taught literature at the local community college, her days filled with books and students, while mine were consumed by blueprints and client meetings. We were comfortable, or so I thought. It started subtly, the way a crack forms in a foundation, imperceptible until it's too late. Emily began staying late at the college, claiming extra tutoring sessions or faculty meetings. I didn't question it. She loved her job and I trusted her implicitly. But then came the small shifts. Her phone buzzing more often, her laughter at messages she wouldn't share, the faint scent of cologne on her scarf that wasn't mine. I brushed it off as paranoia. After all, we'd built a life together. Weekends hiking the cliffs, evenings cooking pasta with too much garlic, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched old movies. She couldn't be drifting. Could she? One Tuesday in late October, I came home early from a canceled meeting. The house was quiet, the autumn light spilling gold across the hardwood. Emily's car was in the driveway, but she wasn't in the kitchen or the living room. I called her name, my voice echoing unanswered. Upstairs, I found her in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone clutched tightly. She startled when I walked in, her face paling as she fumbled to lock the screen. "You're home early," she said, her voice too bright, too forced. I asked what she was doing, and she mumbled something about grading papers online. The lie hung between us, thin and brittle. I didn't push, not then. But that night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, a hollow ache growing in my chest. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The next few weeks were a slow unraveling. I became a man obsessed, though I hid it behind smiles and small talk. Emily's late nights multiplied, her excuses growing flimsier. A department dinner, a guest lecturer's event, a friend in crisis. I started noticing details I'd ignored. The way she'd angle her phone away from me, the new perfume she wore, sharp and unfamiliar, the faint smudge of lipstick on a glass that didn't match her usual shade. Each clue was a splinter under my skin, impossible to ignore. I told myself I was imagining things, that 12 years of marriage couldn't crumble over a hunch. But doubt is a relentless beast. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. She'd said she was meeting a colleague to discuss a curriculum update, leaving the house in a navy dress that hugged her curves more than her usual sweaters did. I waited 20 minutes, then grabbed my keys. I drove to the college, my pulse thudding in my ears. Her car wasn't in the faculty lot. I circled town, telling myself I'd laugh about this later, that I'd find her sipping coffee with some stuffy professor. Then I saw it, her silver Honda parked outside the Blue Anchor, a dimly lit bar on the edge of town. Through the window, I glimpsed her at a corner table, laughing, her hand resting on a man's arm. He was broad-shouldered, dark-haired, maybe 40, with a confidence that made my stomach twist. I didn't go inside. I sat in my car, hands gripping the wheel, watching as they leaned closer, her fingers brushing his. My world tilted. When she came home that night, humming softly, I asked how her meeting went. "Fine," she said, avoiding my eyes as she kicked off her heels. "Just boring faculty stuff." I nodded, swallowing the bile in my throat. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. And I needed to know who he was. His name was Ethan Brooks. Took me 3 days to find out. I started small, checking her phone when she showered, but she'd added a new passcode. So I turned to her laptop, left open one morning on the kitchen counter. Her email was a goldmine, messages from EB buried among student queries and faculty memos. "Can't wait to see you again," one read. "Last night was unforgettable," said another. My hands shook as I scrolled, each word a blade. There were no photos, no explicit confessions, but the tone was intimate, alive in a way her conversations with me hadn't been in years. I dug deeper. Ethan Brooks was a visiting lecturer at the college, a writer with a handful of acclaimed novels and a reputation for charm. His bio on the college website showed a smirking headshot, sharp jawline, piercing eyes. I cross-referenced social media, finding posts from colleagues praising his wit, his magnetic readings. He'd been in town since September, overlapping perfectly with Emily's shift in behavior. I pictured them together, her laughter echoing in his presence, her warmth reserved for him. It was suffocating. That Friday I followed her again. She'd told me she was grabbing drinks with the girls, but her car led me back to the Blue Anchor. I parked across the street, watching as Ethan met her at the door, his hand grazing her lower back as they slipped inside. They stayed for 2 hours. When they emerged, her arm was looped through his, her smile radiant in the streetlight. They didn't see me. I tailed them to a motel off Route 9, a cheap place with flickering neon. She didn't come home until 2 a.m., claiming a flat tire. I lay awake beside her, her breathing soft and steady, while rage coiled inside me like a living thing. Couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every moment was consumed by the image of them. Emily and Ethan, tangled in a betrayal I couldn't unsee. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. Anger sharpened my mind, and I decided on something colder, something meticulous. Revenge wasn't enough. It had to be a reckoning, a dismantling of everything they'd built in their stolen moments. I'd make them feel the weight of what they'd done, not with shouts or fists, but with precision. I started by studying Ethan. I hacked into his public profiles, piecing together his life. He was divorced, no kids, living in a rented loft downtown. His lectures were scheduled twice a week, his evenings often free, perfect for meeting my wife. I tracked his routines, noting the gym he visited, the coffee shop he frequented. Emily was harder to pin down. She was careful, her lies polished, but I installed a tracking app on her phone during a rare moment of access, syncing it to my laptop. It confirmed what I knew. The bar, the motel, a park where they'd sit for hours. I needed more than exposure. I wanted ruin, slow, deliberate, irreversible. I began collecting evidence. Screenshots of her emails, grainy photos from my car, timestamps from the tracker. I contacted a friend, Mark, a private investigator I'd met through work. Over beers, I told him everything, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. He agreed to help, no questions asked. "Give me a week," he said. "I'll get you something concrete." I nodded, the plan solidifying. Emily thought she was clever. Ethan thought he was untouchable. They were wrong. Mark delivered faster than promised. For days later, he handed me a folder in a diner parking lot, his face grim. Inside were photos, Emily and Ethan in the motel parking lot, her lips pressed to his cheek. Audio from a bug he'd planted near Ethan's usual bar table, their voices low and laughing. Receipts from dinners they'd shared. It was a gut punch, but it was fuel. I thanked Mark, paid him double, and drove home with the folder hidden in my trunk. Emily was grading papers when I walked in, oblivious to the storm brewing. That night, I launched Phase 1. Ethan's career was his pride, so I'd start there. Using an anonymous email, I sent the photos and audio to the college dean, hinting at an inappropriate relationship with a faculty member. I didn't name Emily yet. Let Ethan squirm, let him wonder who knew. The next day, I watched her closely. She came home distracted, mentioning drama at work, something about a lecturer under review. I feigned concern, my heart cold. The dominoes were falling. The college didn't waste time. By Wednesday, whispers of Ethan's indiscretion had spread like wildfire through the faculty grapevine. Emily came home that evening, her face tight with worry, her fingers drumming incessantly on the kitchen counter. "They're investigating Ethan," she said, stirring a pot of soup she hadn't touched. "Some anonymous tip about unprofessional behavior. It's ridiculous." I murmured something sympathetic, pouring myself a glass of wine, my pulse steady despite the thrill surging through me. She didn't suspect I was the architect of this chaos. Not yet. I kept my ear to the ground through Mark, who had contacts at the college. Ethan was called in for a meeting with the dean and HR, his lectures temporarily suspended pending review. The photos and audio weren't explicit enough for outright dismissal, but they'd planted doubt, tarnished his golden reputation. Students posted vague complaints online. His charm suddenly creepy, his authority questioned. I watched it unfold from my office, refreshing forums and social media, a quiet satisfaction blooming. Emily, meanwhile, grew restless. Her phone buzzed less, her smiles faded. She'd pace the house, muttering about unfairness. And I'd nod, playing the supportive husband while plotting the next move. Friday night, she slipped out again, claiming a friend's birthday drinks. The tracker showed her at Ethan's loft instead. I didn't follow this time. I had enough. Instead, I pored over the evidence Mark had gathered, sifting for the perfect leverage. One audio clip stood out. Ethan laughing about his ex-wife, calling her pathetic for still texting him. Cruel, careless words. An idea sparked. I'd use his past to tighten the noose, but first, I needed Emily to feel the walls closing in. She came home at midnight, her hair slightly mussed, her excuses thin. I kissed her forehead, tasting the lie, and waited. Ethan's ex-wife, Claire, lived 2 hours south in Portland. Mark tracked her down. A 39-year-old paralegal with a modest apartment and a lingering bitterness toward her former husband. I drove to meet her on Saturday, telling Emily I had a client consultation. Claire was wary when I knocked, her blonde hair pulled back, her eyes narrowing as I introduced myself. "This about Ethan?" she asked, arms crossed. I nodded, laying out the story. My wife, his affair, the pain I couldn't voice. I showed her the audio, her jaw tightening at his mocking tone. "That's him," she spat. "Always a snake." She didn't need much convincing. Ethan had left her broke and humiliated 3 years ago, charming his way out of alimony with a slick lawyer. I offered her a deal. Help me ruin him, and I'd pay her legal fees to reopen their settlement. Her eyes gleamed. "What do you need?" she asked. I handed her a burner phone and a script. Call the college. Claim Ethan had harassed her during their marriage. Corroborate the pattern of behavior. She agreed, her voice cold. He deserves worse. Claire's call hit the college Monday morning. Mark confirmed it. The dean's office was in chaos. Ethan's suspension extended. Emily came home ranting about lies piling up against him, her hands trembling as she poured tea. "Someone's out to get him," she said, her gaze flickering to me for a moment too long. I shrugged, suggesting maybe he wasn't who she thought. Doubt flickered in her eyes, the first crack in her loyalty. That night, I emailed Ethan from another anonymous account, attaching Claire's recorded call. Proof his past was catching up. I wanted him paranoid, cornered. He'd feel it soon. Ethan's world began to crumble publicly by mid-November. A local blog picked up the college scandal, running a piece titled, "Visiting Lecturer Faces Allegations of Misconduct." No names were dropped, but the comments section buzzed with speculation, Ethan's included. Claire's call had tipped the scales. The college launched a formal investigation, and his publisher delayed his next book release, citing reputational concerns. I watched it all from my laptop, a glass of scotch in hand, while Emily grew quieter, her defenses fraying. She tried to hide her panic, but I saw it. Her late-night scrolling, her whispered calls when she thought I was asleep. One evening, she snapped at me over dinner, accusing me of being distant. I kept my tone even, asking if something was bothering her. She faltered, then stormed off to grade papers. The tracker showed her driving to Ethan's loft again, but she returned an hour later, her face pale. I wondered if he'd pushed her away, sensing the heat. Good. Let him squirm. Let her feel the isolation. I escalated. Using a fake profile, I posted snippets of Ethan's audio, his cruel laugh about Claire, on a writer's forum he frequented. The backlash was swift. Colleagues distanced themselves, fans unfollowed, his ego bruised. Emily noticed, too. "He's losing everything," she murmured one morning, staring at her coffee. I nodded, feigning concern. Sounds rough. Inside, I was elated. But this was still foreplay. Petty jabs to soften them up. The real blow was coming, and it would hit Emily where it hurt most. Her pride, her identity, her carefully curated life. Thanksgiving loomed, and I decided to turn the holiday into a weapon. Emily loved hosting. Friends, colleagues, her perfect little world on display. This year, I insisted we invite her department, including Ethan. She hesitated, but I pressed, saying it'd look odd to exclude him amid the rumors. Show support, I said, smiling. She relented, her unease palpable. I spent days planning not the meal but the reveal. Mark rigged a small projector in the living room, synced to my phone. The folder of evidence, photos, audio, emails, became a slideshow, a silent bomb waiting to detonate. The night arrived, crisp and clear, our house filled with chatter and clinking glasses. Ethan showed up, his charm dimmed, his eyes darting. Emily hovered near him, her laugh forced. I played host, refilling drinks, watching them squirm. After dessert, I suggested a toast to the college. Dimming the lights, the projector hummed to life, and there it was. Emily's face on the screen, mid-laugh with Ethan at the blue anchor, followed by a motel shot, then his voice mocking Claire. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily froze, her glass slipping to shatter on the floor. Ethan stammered, "This is a setup." I turned to him, voice calm. "Is it?" Guests fled awkwardly, muttering excuses. Emily stood trembling, her colleagues' stares burning into her. I didn't yell. I just watched her unravel, her perfect facade in shards. Ethan bolted, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. She turned to me, tears streaming, but I walked away, locking myself in my study. Phase 1 of her punishment was complete, humiliation, raw and public. But I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Emily didn't speak to me for 2 days after Thanksgiving. She moved like a ghost through the house, avoiding my gaze, her phone silent for once. The college rumor mill churned. Her reputation as the poised professor cracked. Whispers of her affair now open gossip. Ethan resigned before they could fire him, fleeing town, his loft emptied overnight. I tracked his departure through Mark, satisfied he'd been driven out, but my focus shifted fully to Emily. She'd betrayed me in our bed, our home, our life. She'd pay in kind. I started small, subtle. I canceled her credit cards, citing budget concerns, forcing her to ask me for every penny. I changed the Wi-Fi password, locking her out of her digital escape. She noticed, her frustration mounting, but she didn't fight. Not yet. I wanted her dependent, trapped, feeling the slow squeeze. At night, I'd leave the projector on, replaying snippets of her betrayal in the living room, a looping reminder. She'd wince, retreating upstairs, but there was no hiding. I was rewriting our marriage into a prison, and this was just the beginning of her sentence. Emily's silence broke on the third day after Thanksgiving. She cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes red-rimmed, voice trembling. "Why are you doing this, Daniel? What do you want?" I set my coffee down, meeting her gaze with a calm-eyed perfected. "You made choices, Emily. I'm just living with them." She flinched, her hands balling into fists, but she didn't argue. She knew the projector, the canceled cards, the locked Wi-Fi weren't accidents. She was a prisoner in our home now, and I was the warden. I tightened the screws. I called her college, posing as a concerned spouse, and accidentally let slip more details, dates, locations, ensuring her colleagues knew the depth of her indiscretion. By Monday, she was on administrative leave, her career teetering. She came home that afternoon, slamming the door, her face a mask of fury and shame. "They're reviewing my contract," she spat. I shrugged, chopping carrots for dinner. "Sounds stressful." Her scream echoed through the house, but I didn't react. Rage was good, it meant she felt the weight. Nights became a ritual of torment. I'd leave her old love letters to me, ones she'd written years ago, scattered on her pillow, a cruel contrast to her recent betrayal. I'd play music she and Ethan had mentioned in emails, filling the house with their ghosts. She stopped sleeping in our bed, retreating to the guest room, but I'd tap on the door at odd hours, asking mundane questions. Did she need laundry done? Keeping her on edge. I wanted her to feel watched, judged, stripped of peace. Her hazel eyes, once so bright, dulled with exhaustion. I wasn't done building her cage. Money was Emily's lifeline, her independence, her pride. I'd given her freedom with our joint accounts, trusting her implicitly. Now I turned that trust into a weapon. I hired a lawyer, discreetly, and began untangling our finances. Years of my firm's profits sat in those accounts, and I'd be damned if she kept a dime. I drained our savings into a new account she couldn't touch, leaving just enough in the joint one to cover basics, under my control. When she tried to buy groceries and her card declined, she called me, voice shaking. "What's happening, Daniel?" I told her I was reorganizing, my tone flat. She hung up, defeated. Next, I sold her car. She loved that silver Honda, her freedom machine, she'd called it. I listed it online, claiming it was mine to dispose of since I'd paid most of it off. A guy from Brunswick picked it up Friday morning while she was out walking, her only escape now on foot. When she saw the empty driveway, she stormed inside, screaming, "You can't do this." I handed her the title transfer receipt, legal, binding. "It's done," I said. She sank to the floor, sobbing, and I walked away, the sound of her breaking a quiet victory. Her teaching income was gone with her leave, and I refused to cover her personal expenses, clothes, books, her precious coffee shop visits. She'd beg for cash, and I'd hand her just enough, watching her pride erode with every plea. I'd catch her staring out the window, trapped in a life she couldn't afford to leave. This was revenge in slow motion, stripping her of everything she valued piece by piece. Emily's friends were her armor, her validation. I'd always admired how she cultivated them. Dinner parties, book clubs, weekend brunches. Now I turned them against her. I didn't need lies. The truth was enough. I invited her closest circle, Lisa, Meg, Paul, over for coffee, claiming concern. "She's struggling," I said, showing them snippets of the projector footage, my voice heavy with feigned regret. "I don't know how to help her." Their faces shifted from pity to disgust. Lisa hugged me, promising support. For me, word spread. Invitations dried up. Her phone, once alive with plans, went silent. I'd overhear her leaving voicemails. "It's not what you think. Please call me back." Her tone desperate. At the grocery store, she'd duck her head as old acquaintances passed without a word. One night, Meg dropped by unannounced, confronting her in our living room. "How could you do this to him?" she demanded. Emily stammered, tears falling, but Meg left, slamming the door. I watched from the stairs, silent, as Emily curled into herself on the couch. I pushed further. I joined a local charity board she'd once chaired, charming her former allies. They praised my resilience, sidelining her legacy. At a fundraiser, I overheard someone whisper, "Poor Daniel," stuck with her. Emily stayed home that night, her absence a public confession. Her social world, her identity was ash, and I'd lit the match. She was alone now, except for me, the one she'd betrayed. Christmas approached, and I planned the coup de grace. Emily loved the holiday, decorating, hosting, her warmth on display. This year, I'd twist it into her undoing. I invited her family, her parents, her sister Jen, to our house, insisting it'd be healing. She resisted, but I guilt her into it, knowing she couldn't face them alone. I spent days preparing, not for joy, but for ruin. The projector was ready, the evidence polished into a narrative she couldn't escape. They arrived December 23rd, arms full of gifts, voices cheerful. Emily forced smiles, her hands trembling as she served eggnog. After dinner, I gathered everyone in the living room, claiming a special presentation. The lights dimmed, and there it was, her affair in stark relief. Photos, Ethan's voice, her laughter. Her mother gasped, her father's face hardened. Jen stood and left the room. Emily bolted upright, shrieking, "Turn it off!" I didn't. I let it play, her family watching her life unravel. Her parents left that night, refusing to speak to her. Jen texted me later, "She's dead to us." Emily locked herself in the guest room, her sobs audible through the walls. I dismantled the tree, tossing her ornaments into a box, leaving the house bare. Christmas morning, she emerged, hollow-eyed, finding me sipping coffee amid the wreckage. "You've taken everything," she whispered. I nodded. "You gave it away first." Her punishment was complete. Her career, money, friends, family all gone. She'd live with me in this shell, a monument to her betrayal. Winter settled in, cold and relentless, mirroring the life I'd crafted for us. Emily didn't leave, she couldn't. No job, no car, no savings, no one to run to. She stayed, a shadow in our home, cooking meals she barely ate, staring out windows she couldn't escape through. I kept her there, not with locks, but with the weight of her losses. I'd go to work, come home, and she'd be waiting, silent, broken. It wasn't love anymore. It was possession, my final revenge. I thrived. My firm grew. My social circle expanded, people admiring my strength. Emily became a cautionary tale, a whispered name in town. Ethan resurfaced briefly online, his career a husk, but I didn't care, he was collateral damage. She was the target, and I'd hit her where it hurt most. Her soul. One night, she asked, "Will you ever forgive me?" I looked at her, her face a stranger's, and said, "No." March came, the date ticking to 03/2025. A year since I'd first suspected, and now I stood victorious. Emily sat across from me at breakfast, her hands folded, her spirit gone. I'd taken everything. Her joy, her world, herself, and left her with me, the man she'd wronged. It wasn't loud or violent. It was crueler. A quiet, eternal sentence. She'd live with it, and I'd watch, satisfied, until the end.